All right, we are back for part two. So, we was just looking at breaking down the consumer reporting agencies. The term consumer reporting agencies means any person, boom. Make sure y'all read that. And you know what persons means: corporations, nonprofits, businesses, trusts, all of those different fun things, fun facts for us to be educated on our journey. So going back to your intellectual property or your unalienable rights, as we talked about on part one, right before we was cut off. But what is corporeal and incorporeal property? And here's just talking about also known as incorporeal property is something that a person or a corporation can have ownership of and can transfer ownership to another person or corporation, but has no physical substance. For example, brand identity, knowledge, or intellectual property. The USlegal.com states that incorporeal property is a legal right and property having no physical substance. Okay, so it's the intangibles, like your soul is an intangible, a bank account is an intangible, your name is an intangible. So that's what we're basically getting down um, to your name, which is your personal identifying information, right? Um, so, nonetheless, it's still property. And remember, let's see if we were where were we at? So, inalienable rights refers to rights that cannot be surrendered, sold, or transferred to someone else, especially a natural right, such as the right to own property. However, these rights can be transferred with the consent of the person possessing those rights. Okay? So you have a right to your property, corporeal property and incorporeal property. What does that mean? Incorporeal property is the intangible things you cannot touch, a bank account, your name. Um, Corporeal property is the physical substance, a house, a title, the physical, your car keys, the tangible, your hat, your pants, the physical, right? But this deals incorporeal, but this deal deals with property, corporeal, incorporeal. So incorporeal, going back, is dealing with your property that has no physical substance, your intellectual property, your brand identity, and and you can transfer ownership or you don't have to, right? And so when it comes to the consumer reporting agencies, what do they need? They need your name. They need your name. So we're going to the heart of the problem. They need your name to report on, right? They need your personal, private, identified information. They go get your, they attach the social security number to it. They use your phone number, your email, your address, right? And so they use your name and they say, hey, this is you, and you owe some money. And we already know in part one that the money has been suspended. And that we know from part one, and we broke down the EBA in 1933 on March 9th, opened up the banks with no money in them. Right? They reopened the bank with no gold and silver in them. In violation of what? The Constitution. Who was in violation? Senators, the representatives, and the executive branch. everybody was in violation. Why? Because the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, says that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin, offer, i.e., tender, in payments of debts. And you shall make no law impairing obligations of contract. Well, here is the law that impairs obligations of contract, because this is the money. And this was told to us again in between 1913 and 1929. This publication came out from the prophet Drew Ali, Noble Drew Ali. He gave a divine warning to the nations. And this was published in our newspaper to the general public. And he was telling them that, hey, and it was about the wealth of all national governments, gold and silver, and commerce. Okay, so the wealth is this combination of what's the lawful money, gold and silver, and the business, the commerce, the transactions, the trade and exchange, the business. And he said that all of that belongs to the citizens alone. So not to the government, not to the representative government, but not to the Federal Reserve, but to the citizens. To the citizens, it belongs. Your right of ownership over the wealth. You have an ownership. You have a right. You have inherited. This is your inheritance. This is your estate. This is your trust fund with respect to the Constitution. Because the Constitution says, hey, gold and silver by law. And no law shall be created to impair out no state. And right. So they got a pledge to pay, the obligations of the government. Why? Because they violated the law here by suspending the gold. Who did it? House Joint Resolution. Congress did it. Congress enacted an unconstitutional precedent here. And because of that, they say, well, hey, we got to pay all of the obligations. We got to take care of the obligations. So upon us, everything is discharged. But you got to communicate with us. You have to develop a relationship with this branch, with the branches, the appropriate authorities, with respect to taking care of their obligation, to discharge of their obligations from an issue that they created. I'm looking for here, right? So now we know that the American people, by name and principles, well, what does that mean? Name and principles. Well, you got to deal with your status. Who are you? Being an American is a nationality. American is a nationality. And the American people have a trust fund set up for them that deals with the public debt. They take care of all of that under here, 18 USC Section 8, obligations of other securities of the United States defined. The obligations include, bills, the public debt. We'll take care of your bills. We got that obligation due to the fact of those, the historical events that took place that led us up to this point. So what the credit report is reporting is actually a whole application of inaccuracies. So number one is that they're trespassing on your intellectual property. So for the people that's trying to, that's learning how to fix their credit, this is fixing your credit under a Moorish scope or within Moorish science, using constitutional law to solve the problem here. And it's in constitutional law deals with the history. So when you deal with intellectual property rights, so remember, your property rights are unalienable, are legal rights that provide creators protection from original work, inventions, or appearance of products artistic work, scientific developments, and so on. Basically speaking, intellectual property are common types of legal IP protection for those identity, IP protection for those who invent. And so here go Moore's history lesson here. So this is from Prophet Noble Jew Ali, founder of the Moorish Science Temple of America, 1913 AD, born January 8th, 1886. Happy Moorish New Year's. So it says, in all other governments, when a man is born and raised there, that's what the prophet stated. In all other governments, when a man is born and raised there and asks for his national descent, name, and if he fails to give it, he is misused, imprisoned, or exiled. Any group of people that fail to answer up to the constitutional standards of law by name and principle. So that's where I get it from. See, where we get that from? By name and principle. Because to be a citizen of any government, right, you must claim your national descent name, because they place their trust upon issue and names formed by their forefathers. So like my name was formed by my forefathers. So my forefathers are the inventors of my name. And they placed this intellectual property in a trust, right? And without your national descent, hey, what the prophet tells us, we got no true wealth. And so this is what's been going on, is that the commercialization of our names, of our intellectual property, and the claim that everybody's making in this case, the consumer reporting credit agencies, because they're saying they have a right to your personal private identifying information, i.e. your intellectual property, and that you gave consent to that, to them publishing your private and personal information to third parties with respect to your credit worthiness and their reporting inaccuracies. So one, they don't have consent to report, to furnish, to have access, to administrate anything revolving your estate, which would be in this case, your intellectual property would be in this case, your name, which is the entry port. It's your vessel. So your name is incorporeal property. And the issue is your rights to the property are unalienable, and that's protected under the Constitution. So one, for Moorish Americans, or for any national citizen, you have to proclaim your your nationality and your free national name of your forefathers. Because you can't do, that's why, it's been brothers teaching, sisters teaching that you can't do business in another person's name without their consent. Well, that's what creates the tax, because you owe for doing business in someone else's name. And we know for a fact that during the time of slavery, that millions of people lost their national identity, lost their nationalities in that Holocaust-like condition. And post-slavery, post-Civil War into the 21st century, you still have that condition that exists via a lack of education now, right? Via lack of education. So under the Moorish law, one will have to proclaim his or her nationality and free national descent name, because our forefathers, as he stated, placed their trust in names formed and issued out to the family so that their inheritance is protected. So we have a trust established for those that understand that. So what's happening here is that the consumer reporting agencies, the third-party debt collectors, and others are claiming that you have abandoned property. You have abandoned your right to property, right of ownership to property. So that's why they are able to gain access to your personal private identifying information without your consent, because you have not addressed them via notice saying what they call a credit dispute, um, and dispute the inaccuracies. One, on who gave them the authority. Who gave you the authority? Your proof of claim. I need to see a contract where I gave you permission, where you have written permission, my consent to have access to my intellectual property. I didn't authorize you, which makes you unauthorized user of my intellectual property. And now you have incurred liability for taking such action without consent, because you got to pay to make money off my intellectual property, because they get paid to publish information to third parties concerning your status without consent, without going unchecked, without going unhindered, without any restriction whatsoever, and at the expense of millions of Americans, because they don't have they're uninformed. We're an uninformed population in the 21st century, an era of information that is that's worse than a nuclear bomb. If you're not into the knowing, and in the communities that has a demographic like the city of Pontiac, where you got 37, maybe a little bit higher now. It was 34, maybe a little bit higher percent of nearly 40% of poverty in the community, where you are a hub of great diversity. And so we want to help assist the American people today with informing them on how to hold consumer reporting agencies and other data furnishing companies accountable for the intrusion on your natural right, on your private property without your consent. You can hold them accountable too. Why? Because I just told you, what the law just showed you, they don't have consent. The actual claim is not that you owe. The actual claim is that you abandon your rights to property, which is a constitutional issue at this point. Why? Because you didn't give consent. In the moment that you give notice, all of this stuff goes away. All of it ceases to exist, because they don't have your consent unless you've abandoned the property, your rights to property. So what does abandonment mean? Abandonment means, according to the lawdictionary.org, the property that an owner has given up all claims, possession, and rights. No designation has been given as the possessor. So therefore, I can claim unclaimed properties. I can make a claim on abandoned property. And that's what they have done. And while we, the American people, are scrambling around, trying to go through this loophole, trying to go through that loophole, or just moving around in this condition, this economic hardship, because of all of the predators that's involved into this fraudulent activity, which started a long time ago via historical events and data that we pulled, we were able to present to the viewers here. But it all boils down to the fact that the education is missing around the issue or the subject matter here, which is abandonment. Abandonment, meaning you waived your rights to property. You waived that right of ownership. You waived, because what you are in this case, when we talk about, when we go here, this is why it's so important to proclaim nationality, right? And nationality of right is either by birth or by naturalization. So what this birth clause mean is that now we're dealing with an inheritance. So for example, I'm Moorish American, descendants of Moroccans and born in America. So my nationality arises by birth. This is a birthright. And so this denotes my status in dealing with the political history, being a grantor to the United States, being a part, the fabric of the founding of the United States, being that North, South, Central America is part of the Moroccan Empire. But this is not about me, but this is about each and every one of us status as American, the American people, right? And so coming out of that status is black. Black is not a nationality. American is a nationality, and American is any other copper color, any other copper tone, various natives on the land when the Europeans on the American continent when the Europeans arrived, right? And so um, that also meaning indigenous aboriginal. And we have this great American covenant that brought us all together, the Christian nations, the Muslim nations, all nations from all over the world under this holy covenant, God, family, nation, to respect each other, to honor each other, to maintain the law, to maintain the peace, the covenant, the great peace, the great covenant. Out of one, we are many, because these principles are inherited in each and every one of us to maintain the order of civilization in peace and harmony under love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. So our objective today is get to the audience the necessary information that empowers he or she as Americans to hold institutions accountable that are weakening our society economically, because we are under attack. This is about getting America back wealthy again and keeping America wealthy again, wealthy and strong and innovative and vibrant and viable and sustainable, and to continue to leverage the greatest diversity that has ever been seen on the planet Earth. Is right here at North America, within these beautiful within the continental United States of America. So um so our effort here is not only making America great again, but keeping America great, keeping America great by bringing our communities back into the constitutional fold again. These democratic cities, we gotta bring light into these cities like Pontiac, where all the poverty is focused at, right? This is where the poverty and crime and all these things is happening at, in communities that don't have this education. So this is an opportunity for them to get the history lesson, the full curriculum here holistically, so they can be brought into that professional development, to that independent American that we all need right now, because other nations is pressing the issue at removing us from the top and have begun processes, have executed processes to invade this country's political structure, economic structure, our social structure, our households. I mean, we're feeling this thing from the cyber all the way to under the ground where the pipelines is being built at, to undermine American interests and our allies, and it is serious. So this is our effort, stabilizing humanitarian efforts, American efforts to put American first, to ensure that the American public has the information to make more informed decisions, because we need cities like Pontiac, communities like Pontiac, the individual American citizens to come into their own, to be in a capacity to handle business under our constitutional system and benefit from our constitutional system. It is time for the average American, the minority communities, the disadvantaged communities to realize the American dream by properly being educated and fully informed on their civic affairs, obligations, and what's at stake for our future. Our young, our youth, our children need to be fully empowered by their parents in their households. So we gotta absolutely eradicate poverty. And you do that with education. We got to absolutely eradicate crime. And we do that with education. We got to absolute eradicate this ideology that God is not supreme. The great God of the universe is supreme. Nature is supreme. And so that's what our nation was founded on: natural law, natural rights, inherited upon every human being on the face of this earth. This is a very, very, very serious moment in our nation, in our world right now. And we can stay victims, or we can rise as Americans, and we can execute and fulfill the covenant of our American Constitution and secure the posterity, our future posterities, for another million years. And so here we are, on ground zero here, grassroots education. And so we got to exercise our rights. You know, when we go and examine the First Amendment, which is constantly under attack, it talks about a key word, which is two keywords, two key terms, which deals with free exercise. So going back, and it talks about, in the First Amendment, it said Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. So now what that means is, each and every American has a right to freely exercise their rights. This is constitutionally protected, meaning that you are a secure party as an American citizen, as an American national, as an American inhabitant. You are a secure party under the Constitution. And the moment that you exercise that, it shall be enforced. The judicial branch, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and each American citizen shall enforce our Constitution. Yes, yes, sir. So what's going on is that because of the lack of knowledge creates an absence of action. Therefore, you've abandoned your property rights, your rights to property, and now the consumer reporting agencies can do their job, in robbing you and reporting inaccuracies. Number one, and two, and so we deal with them, we're holding them accountable. Say, well, wait a minute. Not only are you reporting without consent at this point, but you also reported inaccuracies, claiming that I owe some money to, and then when I go and establish credit and relationships with other financial institutions, I'm unable to get access. Now, for DDI zone communities, the disproportionately impacted communities, they don't even have an iota a knowledge on what's going on to them, and they thinking in their day-to-day activities, in their day-to-day living, that this is the way it's supposed to go. It's the biggest crime in the history of humanity right now, going on in the United States of America right now. And it's done without Americans' knowledge all around the board. It's assumed that communities like Pontiac know. No, they don't know. They're learning at this very point right now. That's because of people like myself that's willing to get out here on the online, in the streets, in the households, in politics, in the youth education and sports, wherever we need to be at, facilitating information that allows Americans to become wealthy again. When I first became aware of the attack on the nation, I said, wow, the only way, and President Trump, under his leadership, he made it clear what our mission is here. We got to educate people beyond the ignorance of slavery, which keeps us in slavery. The racism keeps us in slavery. All nations have suffered slavery. They don't get, when we talk about critical race theory, well, the fact of the matter is, when you get outside of the states and you go traveling around the world, you see the true history. In fact, if you go and you go to a university, you will get the full American history, and we're in there. We're not just the victims; we're the inventors of slavery. We had our hands every part into the European slave trade when we was importing millions of Caucasian families into Europe during our time of rule. All nations have suffered slavery. This is world history here. And so Yes, this is sad. This is tragic. That's happening. That has happened, and we must move beyond this mental slavery at this point. Meaning that we got to deal with the truth, and we have to realize that we're a family. We're humanity. So I know I'm black, pink, and green, and they green, purple colors, and all this other crazy stuff. No, we're Americans. We're Americans. We're the nation. We're the people. We the people of all different nationalities, creeds, backgrounds, ethnicities, etc., etc., etc. We all share the same heritage, from wars to peace, from the brink of destruction to the marvelous empires ever known to humanity. So let's make no mistake about it. They're reporting inaccuracies. Number one, they don't have consent. They don't have jurisdiction. They don't have the administrative authority because you didn't give them any, outside the fact that you're in default because you failed to answer, because you didn't know. If you don't know the system that's happening to you, you don't know how things are happening and the processes for which they happen, you don't know how to systematically impact change in your own life. We need each and every American citizen to be wealthy again. So you address the with the whole concept of the credit dispute, the notice, the fraud, right? Notice of identity theft, because you got a bunch of people moving about doing business in your name as if they were you, as if they have permission from you, and they don't, which causes the dispute, which is a notice, which is, hey, somebody owe me some money because I've been damaged for ever since I've been, ever since this third party debt collection decided to publish or furnish this information to the consumer reporting agencies. That's an issue, right? So now all of these are really consumer reporting agencies. They're really data furnishing firms, right? And so they just got the bigger ones, which is the 3 credit bureaus and Dun and Bradstreet. Then you got the little itty bitty micro ones that goes after the individual, takes on, buys up all these little small obligations and debts, which are actually money, or which are actually considered to be stocks and bonds, right? And it's this whole system in place where they're able to redeem this stuff for par value or face value, and they've already been paid. This stuff has already been taken care of a long time ago. What's happening is you got all of these global interests is feeding off the virtues of each and every one of us, and then at will they play the game like it's racism, so we can fight each other. So as we're fighting each other, it's a bigger enemy, it's a bigger threat that's destroying us all. And while we're sitting around here still dealing with poverty issues in America, because really Americans are uninformed and the schools are falling apart in these democratic cities that have been failed a long time ago. These schools have been falling a long time ago, which is how you get to this increase in poverty all throughout the country, focused in the so-called black community, and then the black community becomes army military members for political reasons, and all they got to do to be triggered is say racism. It's the white man fault, and all of a sudden there's no education around what they're talking about, and they can be led off the cliff to serve a means that's to their benefit, that's not to their benefit. And that's what's been going on. So we're here to bring Americans out of there. Say, pull them out. We got to pull them out. We got to get them back into the game. And here's how we get back into the game. Our issues is economics. We have no credit, no credibility because of the lack of education. So let's reverse that. Let's convert that over from liabilities into an asset. So today they called you a debtor. Tomorrow they're going to call you a creditor. Why? Because you're going to address them, because they have to pay you to do business in your name. And since they tried to sneak around you and do it, that's illegal. That is illegal. They can't transfer ownership on your private intellectual property, incorporeal property, without your consent. That's unconstitutional and that's illegal. That's stealing. That's what we refer to as identity theft, which brings us into, we'll stay federal. Well, I'm in the state of Michigan, so we'll go 445.65. And what that does is say, hey, Michiganders, right? You need consent. Without consent, that's identity theft. You got to have consent. Okay, so consent is important because that's your freedom of choice. That's back to the Constitution, protecting your freedoms, the incorporeal property, right? Your rights to freedom, that's incorporeal, that's intangibles. My right to breathe, my right to not be masked, my right to choose, my freedom to choose, right? My freedom of choice, that's constitutional. My freedom to speak without being censored, to express myself in my five senses. That's law. That's God-given. That's divine law. In Moorish science, we teach that all members, according to our covenant, teaches that all members are to exercise their five senses who is able to do so. So we know for a fact, and facts matter, because why? When you go to the judicial branch, you're going to need your facts because you take them to court. Because not only are they trespassing, and so this is what MCL says about, let's see, MCL. So remedies for breach of trust. So the intellectual property is dealing with your name. Another word for property is estates, and the Americans are the protected individuals here. So being breach of trust is dealing with the highest form of law here, which is constitutional. And there is a violation. There is a breach of trust here. One, they don't have consent. So this person is trespassing on a private trust estate, which is your intellectual property, i.e. your personal private identifying information. You did not give the consent for them to transfer ownership, to do anything with that name or personal private information, which in law, that's illegal. So whatever you ask for, you're going to get it. So we just kind of going from jurisdiction. I just kind of went into the Michigan MCLs dealing with the jurisdiction of the state. So we kind of going back and forth just for clarity. Because I like to operate, you can go to the judicial branch and say, hey, I want redress for the breach of trust. I want them to pay some money for damages for unauthorized user fee. I didn't get them permission to transfer any business in my name. They just transfer rights of ownership. They're acting as if they're me without, so that's in other words, in short, that's a violation of the law. So let's go back. So this is an important lesson here. What is incorporeal property? Incorporeal property is a legal right having no physical existence. Incorporeal is the opposite of corporeal, which is the property that can be perceived. So one is tangible, one is what? Intangible. So your name is intangible. That's why a lot of times, like, we create titles to our names, right? We have a title to our name, and we able to come. And I'll say that for a different lesson, but the important thing is that you have title to your name, you have rights to your name. You just was uninformed, and you didn't know that was considered property, trust property, or an estate, right? A trust. So when you start talking estate, you're talking about trust. So that makes you a trust beneficiary to the consumer. Okay. And so what that means is you control everything and own nothing. The trust owns it. And